What up, though, family? Today we're diving into one of the most iconic works in African literature, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It's a masterpiece that not only introduced the world to the rich culture of the Igbo people, but also challenged Eurocentric narratives that dominated African history. For my black brothers and sisters in America, this book is a gateway to understanding the complexities of pre-colonial Africa and the devastating impact on colonialization. Let's get into it. All right, now just to let everybody know, there are going to be light spoilers ahead. So I will cover the synopsis. I wanted to cover a little bit more instead of just poignant themes that I selected, but we're going to cut right back over into the scripted portion right now. At its core, Things Fall Apart tells the story of Okonkwo, a proud and ambitious leader of the Igbo village of Umufia. Okonkwo is determined to rise above the shame of his father, Unoka, a man who is considered weak and irresponsible. Through Okonkwo's struggles, Achebe paints a vivid picture of Igbo society, its traditions, rituals, and communal life. Here's an excerpt from the book. Among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Achebe's prose brings his world to life, but his story takes a dark turn when European missionaries and colonial administrators arise, disrupting the delicate balance of Igbo society. Okonkwo's world crumbles under the weight of his cultural collision, a metaphor for what happened to the countless African societies during colonialization. To understand Things Fall Apart, you have to understand Chinua Achebe himself. Born in 1930 in Nigeria, Achebe grew up in the crossroads of two worlds, the Igbo traditions of his ancestors and the Western education introduced by British colonizers. He once said in an interview, "I was brought up in a Christian family, but my parents didn't erase our tradition and roots. This duality made me curious about where these two worlds met and collided." Achebe was frustrated by how African societies were portrayed in colonial literature, depicted as primitive, savage, or non-existent. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness is a prime example. Achebe didn't just critique these narratives, he rewrote them, giving African voices the dignity they deserved. That is what makes Things Fall Apart revolutionary. One of the central themes in Things Fall Apart is the tension between tradition and change. Okonkwo represents tradition, a man bound by the customs of his ancestors. The arrival of missionaries symbolizes change, but not the change that brings progress. Instead, it's a destructive force, erasing identities and histories. This is an excerpt from the book. The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. This theme of cultural disintegration is echoed in Achebe's later works, like No Longer at Ease and Arrow of God. In these novels, he explores the complexities of navigating a post-colonial world, where the scars of colonialism remain fresh. At its heart, Things Fall Apart examines the tension between tradition and change, a theme that is as relevant today as it was in Achebe's time. Okonkwo's deep commitment to Igbo tradition comes at a stark contrast to the sweeping transformation brought about by colonialization. This clash raises profound questions. How do we preserve our heritage in the face of external pressures? How do we adapt without losing ourselves? Okonkwo was deeply grieved, and it was not just a personal grief. He mourned for the clan, which he saw breaking up and falling apart, and he mourned for the warlike men of Umufia, who had so unaccountably become soft like women. Achebe doesn't just critique colonialization, he critiques the rigidity of Okonkwo himself. Okonkwo's inability to adapt to change, his adherence to an unyielding version of masculinity and tradition, is as much a factor in his downfall as the arrival of the Europeans. This theme of cultural disintegration and identity crisis is echoed in modern works. Take, for instance, Chimamanda Ngozi's Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun. Set during the Biafran War in Nigeria, Adichie examines how the legacies of colonialism fueled conflict and disconnection. The characters grapple with their identities, much like Okonkwo does, in a more contemporary setting. Or take a look at Tanisha Coates' The Water Dancer. While it's set in an era of American slavery, Coates explores the destruction of African American families, a legacy of colonial systems of control. The propagandist, Hiram, wrestles with preserving his memories and cultural roots in the face of systemic oppression. Like Achebe's Okonkwo, he's searching for balance in a world that constantly seeks to erase him. Even more recently, Layla Saeed's Me and White Supremacy takes a different approach, asking readers to confront the systems of colonial thought that persist in today. While not fiction, it echoes the themes of Things Fall Apart by forcing us to examine how these structures disrupt communities and identities. The genius of Achebe's work is that it doesn't provide easy answers. Okonkwo's tragedy isn't just a result of European colonialization. It's also rooted in the ways his own society was vulnerable to exploitation. His rigid ideas of masculinity, his fear of appearing weak, and his inability to embrace change all contribute to his downfall. This conversation also extends into the realm of Afrofuturism. Consider N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy. In these novels, Jemison explores the collapse of civilizations and the resilience of oppressed people. The themes of cultural survival and adaptation mirror Achebe's own concerns, albeit in a speculative setting. Similarly, Ryan Coogler's Black Panther reimagines African identity by presenting Wakanda, a society untouched by colonialism. The film explores what might have been if Africa had been allowed to thrive without interference, but it doesn't shy away from conflict, particularly in the ideological clash between T'Challa and Killmonger, a tension that echoes Okonkwo's internal struggles. In all of these works, we see Achebe's enduring influence, his portrayal of a society on the brink of change that continues to inspire stories about cultural resistance, identity, and the cost of progress. The Klan was a lot like a lizard. If it lost its tail, it soon grew another. Okonkwo was not the man to accept such a fate. He would rather strangle himself than say he was the lizard's tail and he was gone for good. Achebe's message is clear. Change is inevitable, but how we confront it and how we preserve what matters and let go of that defines who we are. For Black Americans, Things Fall Apart is more than just a novel. It's a reminder that our history didn't begin with slavery. Achebe gives us a window into a time when African societies thrived, with their own governments, economies, and philosophies. It's also a warning about the consequences of division, something we can't afford to ignore today. Achebe's words resonate because they challenge us to reclaim our narratives. For those of us in the diaspora, it's a call to reconnect to the roots that we have long been separated from. If you enjoy Things Fall Apart, I encourage you to explore Achebe's other works. Each one offers a unique lens into the African experience, from the struggles of independence in anthills of the savannah to the cultural dilemmas of modernity and no longer at ease. Achebe didn't just write stories, he documented history. So if you haven't read Things Fall Apart, pick up a copy today. It's more than just a novel, it's a piece of our shared history. And remember, our stories matter, so let's keep telling them. Okay, so Here's the afterword. This was another one of those books that I read in middle school. It was a part of a reading plan. I don't know if it was special to Detroit Public Schools or whether or not this was something that was a part of a national plan. However, Things Fall Apart was included, and at the time I didn't understand why. But when I revisit what this book, the main themes of this book were not only main themes, but the setting, as well as a lot of the context that is provided within the book. It is primarily to remind people that Africa was an independent region, an entire continent filled with diverse peoples, religions, and ethnic groups. Even though it focuses on one, there are a few scenes where they go to the market and you realize you're a part of something that's much larger than just a single group that's being mentioned in a story. You do kind of feel that futuristic vibe where everyone is congealed into large groups working together. However, it is extremely unique because that is not something that was being portrayed at the time in literature when it came to Africa. Much of what early English literature had to offer when it came to speaking on Africa was basically saving savages from themselves. This book flipped that on its head. So that's the main thing. That's the A plot. That's what you're going to get. Now, for the B plot, as a young man reading this, you see the story of someone who hopefully resembles a man that you know, a very strong, opinionated man who is extremely convicted. And through his convictions, his entire life is guided. And that's very noble. However, this ties into something that we're dealing with in American society today, the difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity. Okonkwo is the story of a man who has taken all of the positives from masculinity and managed to warp them into a crutch to sustain his own image of himself. Okonkwo is participating in his narrative, but he isn't writing it. And I hope that doesn't go over many people's heads. I sincerely hope it doesn't. Okonkwo's ego is so strong that it doesn't allow him to change with the world around him. And it doesn't allow him to participate in the world around him. We hear a lot about if you're a black man listening to this, I'm sure you're familiar with code switching. If you're a black woman, also I'm sure you're familiar with code switching and its necessity. Okonkwo is a digestible literary depiction of Dave Chappelle's character when keeping it real goes wrong. Sometimes you need to work your way in to the situation in order to affect change on it. And I don't want to get into too much about positioning yourself where you need to be, but stick with the channel. I'm not gonna drop too many bombshells on you, too many hot takes, but stick with your channel. Hopefully you'll get the big picture soon.